The 517th Parachute Regimental Combat Team was part of the greatest generation of soldiers to fight during World War II. One of only two independent combat teams, they had one purpose: preserve freedom for all. Handpicked and trained for special operations, their final mission was part of an epic battle to stop Hitler's last desperate charge. They joined as young, adventurous enthusiasts and left wise, hardened men. This, then, is their story.
Signed a piece of paper saying I would jump out of a moving aircraft and land via parachute. Very exciting.
It was kind of like Disneyland, you know. It was fun to ride that cable down, fall into sawdust, and, you know. That's why I went into paratroops.
From the very outset, they said, you are going to be the finest troops in the United States Army. You can beat anybody, any enemy that you can handle. There won't be any that you can't take care of.
In our history of battle, we always made our mission. We were always successful. Some were very difficult, some were easier, but we were used to covering ground, being successful.
As America entered World War II, new strategies for defense were employed. Technological and equipment development allowed men to jump into targeted hotspots with exacting precision. Considered some of the most difficult and risky missions, these soldiers would parachute into combat, carrying everything they needed on their backs: weapons, food, water, and an objective. Richard Seitz first witnessed this new discipline during basic training, and he was mesmerized.
About 1940, I was at Fort Benning taking the basic officer course, and at that exact time, the parachute test platoon was just organized and just beginning their jumps, and often I saw them jump, and I thought, by damn, I'd like to try that.
Seitz volunteered for the parachute troop and was sent to Fort Benning, Georgia for training. He was later sent to Camp Toccoa for specialized recruitment and selection, a testament to just how important this unit would become.
I interviewed each man that came in, and I had the option of turning him down. We interviewed some 3,000 men to get 800.
Get to Toccoa, and I looked out of the window, and it was all red clay. I said, Ed, my God, they're killing them right off the train here. It's a lot of blood mixed in with that sand.
The only blood came from the blood and gut speech given by experienced trainers like Boom Boom Aliki, designed to scare off the timid. If that didn't work, the next challenge was to jump off a 34-foot tower, and if you refused, you were assigned to go elsewhere.
I remember very well the interview I had with Colonel Seitz, and his question was, why did you choose the paratroops? And I said, I want to be in paratroops because I want to be in the best unit there was.
I was so impressed with them. They were truly Jack Armstrong's All-American. We said, we're not only looking for brawn, we're looking for heart.
While the artillery and engineers moved to Camp McCall, the infantry began basic training.
I know we went to bed at night wearing our shorts and our boots, because in the morning, before dawn, we just rolled down and started running.
Either in the afternoon you ran up to Currahee, or you had what we called a pleasure run of about 4 miles. But that was a routine. And we did it, the weather was hot as hell at Toccoa. So we did all of our training in shorts and boots. God, the troops they were bronze, all real suntanned and magnificent physical character.
They worked us from dawn till dark, physical exercise, running up and down Mount Currahee, taking weapons with us. Sometimes one would drop out, we'd pick him up and take him. The 517th broke every record of any parachute regiment that progressed through Toccoa.
From Toccoa, the men went to Fort Benning, Georgia for jump school. They trained under Colonel Lewis Walsh, a young, aggressive commander who had witnessed combat under atrocious conditions. Determined to prepare his unit to survive and win under any circumstances, he set extremely high standards.
We went from McCall down to Benning as a unit and took basic parachute training. The men said it's a piece of cake because they were in such damn good shape, cocky as hell. And they got their induction at Toccoa and then got their basic training together and then went to jump school together. That's really molding them pretty close. We knew we were a cut above the rest of the Army, and we made every effort to show it, socially, professionally.
In the winter of 1943, the unit was sent north for a practice run called the Tennessee Maneuvers. This exercise was the final test to be considered combat ready. The terrain perfectly emulated parts of Europe, where they would soon find themselves in the real war.
Lots of marching, night and day, mud up to your ass. And we were suddenly pulled out of the 17th Airborne, and that's when we became a separate combat team.
The independent combat team was made up of the 517th Parachute Infantry Regiment, the 460th Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, and the 596th Airborne Engineer Company, all parachute jumpers.
We went back to McCall in preparation for shipment overseas. Finally, we're going to get into this. Yeah, we'd had a good year of training, individual and unit training. And we'd made a couple mass jumps during that training. And Lou Walsh was he was a magnificent trainer and tough, sometimes mean, but he was good.
Walsh was replaced by Colonel Graves because of his attitude and high demand, but many credit his stringent training as the difference between life and death once on the front line. In March of 1943, Colonel Graves took command of the trooper team and made final preparations for the boat ride to Italy.
We were on the Santa Rosa, which had been an Italian cruise ship. We did have a company of wax, which did, provide good, clean fun, I think.
The men gave little thought to the dark days ahead. After 2 weeks of smooth sailing and light-hearted fun, the big ship arrived at the Bay of Naples. Italy, trial by fire. Soon the fun would be over, and the reality of battle began. Within a matter of weeks, they became a well-seasoned combat team fighting in rough terrain.
We landed over the beach, and except for some long-range artillery fire, there was no opposition. The idea of us landing there was to get behind the Germans.
I remember getting off the LCI and we hadn't got a couple of 100 yards when a massive explosion occurred partway up. It didn't hit anybody, landed in an open field, but that was our opening crescendo of wow.
Lieutenant West came back and he said, I want everybody to dig in because the Germans have the high ground, they can see us, and we're probably going to be shelled before the evening's over. And we hadn't dug in good when here come the incoming round. I'll never forget those because all of a sudden you realize that they were trying to kill you.
General Zase, who became a four-star general, had the 3rd Battalion. Dick Seitz had the 2nd Battalion. And Bill Boyle had the 1st Battalion. Bill Boyle was a real gung-ho soldier, a very brave man, a very aggressive individual when it came to combat. Bill was up in the front line all the time. In fact, he was leading the battalion the morning that we got into combat. We were in a loose approach march, and a machine gun had set up behind this stone wall. Well, Bill Boyle and his radio operator and his runner came around on the side and were pinned down by that machine gun. So I opened fire on the machine gun. I knocked out the gunner. I went down then and took the machine gun, and I opened up with the machine gun. And I sent Shorty back with the prisoners. So they were the first prisoners captured by the 517.
I learned a lot that first day, that you could get some people hurt. But we were all charged up. I didn't have any trouble getting the battalion to move. I mean, we were ready.
Combat losses had been relatively low during the brief period in action, but still total 129, including 17 killed. The 517th had been sent to Italy in response to a request for airborne troops for the invasion of southern France. It was to be a secondary attack to draw German forces away from Overlord, the main landing. Vital combat experience had been gained that would see them through the hardest times yet to come. Part of the 1st Airborne Task Force, the 517th would be one of only 3 infantry divisions to invade southern France. Their mission was to drop more than 5,000 paratroopers in order to protect the army arriving from the Mediterranean. The army was there to destroy German resistance up through the Rhone Valley. More than 100 miles long, Operation Dragoon was the last large-scale night jump of World War II.
We didn't know whether it would be a piece of cake or not. It was the poorest kept secret in the damn world. Everybody, it seemed, in Rome knew about it. Axis Sally continually mentioned it on her program.
Hello, fellas. Hello, you men from a country where selfishness and greed on the part of many exists at the expense.
And she said, welcome 517th to Italy. We see you've got your crew cuts. Yeah, we cut our hair back to burr cut. We see you all ready to go for the invasion of southern France. And we want you to know that you don't have to worry about finding the drop zone because we're going to light it up for you. And that was always encouraging. They knew more about where we were going, Burl and Sal did, than we knew ourselves.
It was a lot of excitement, personal excitement. We were feeling now we were going to do what we were trained to do.
We'd been up all day, and so we were up most of the night also, getting ready for the jump, get the equipment ready, get parachutes ready. It's all dark now, and it's getting around midnight, something like that. And there were some ladies, we called them gray ladies, and they were women about my mother's age and a little older. And they were serving coffee and donuts. And I began to notice a few tears in their eyes. Now I know why.
We didn't board the airplane until about 2 o'clock. But you know, get ready to wait. So I remember at the departure airfield, most of the troops were sacked out. They were bushed.
I was wide awake the whole way. The door was off, and you could see out. I was sitting just opposite the door, and I could see the water, the ocean when we were flying over the Mediterranean, and I couldn't believe that some of the guys would go to sleep.
We didn't hardly say a word to each other until we were ready to jump. And then it was not anything to talk about. It was just doing the normal things like stand up, hook up, and check the equipment in front of you.
I was going to be the first guy out, and I'm going to be riding in the door, you know. Lead man in the lead airplane of the 517. And I was concerned about the damn thing, you know. As we hit landfall, I could see the tracers coming up.
4:32 a.m., that's 0432, 15 August 1944. The red light is on. That's the get ready light. And I'm standing in the door. I'm leading our headquarters group out. That was my headquarters. And I'm standing in the door, and I looked at my watch, and we were 2 minutes late. We were supposed to be 0430 over the drop zone.
Plane is noisy, and we were doing all kinds of things, smoking like crazy, of course. And even one of the guys who never did smoke before was smoking. When finally the time came to jump, the green light, out we went. The vivid memory there is the sudden silence. The engine gone away from us, We were floating down.
We jumped at a low altitude. I had no idea where we were, and I found out that the aircraft didn't know where we were either. But I looked down, and then I'm listening. It's very quiet, and I can hear waves crashing over the rocks.
If you were over the water, you were gone. That was it. There was no way you could come out in time. You just go to the bottom like a rock.
And then there was a blanket of fog that obscured everything.
Looked like the ocean. It was fog, solid fog.
And so I'm taking off my equipment as much as I could, prepared to do one of these things where we do a water landing and try to get away from the chute.
I remember hitting the ground and I'm thinking, oh boy, I'm all here. I took inventory. I mean, with a real whop. And I took inventory physically, and I didn't break anything. I'm not spraying. I look around, no German with a bandit ready to stab me. And I didn't see a soul anywhere.
I landed in an olive grove. I got on the ground. My white chute stayed in the tree. And I got out of my harness, had to put my M1 back together, and looked up at that white parachute, and I said, you know, when it gets daylight, every German in France is going to see that white parachute. Except when it got daylight, there were thousands of white parachutes all over the place. And then I met one of my buddies. Then we met two medics. And I said, isn't this great? 4 guys with 2 rifles. And then a little later on, we met the Brits. And you know what they were doing? Don't laugh. They were making tea. He said, hey, Yank, would you like a spot of tea?
I was alone. That was scary. And lo and behold, I heard some people talking. And then I said, hey, I'm American, you know. And I heard them. The thing that was scary on top of that, I heard the clicks of the M1. Safeties come off. I said, hey, don't shoot, I'm an American. I can remember that this day.
And I'm walking around at dark, and I've seen fellas all over the place. Even though it's dark, you see something. And I met one fellow who was standing there, and he had a Tommy gun, and he was shaking. And he says, you know what they did? They dropped us in the wrong place. My one comfort there was that there was someone a little more afraid than I was.
Well, it was dark, and I lit at a tree, and I didn't know how far I was off the ground, but I knew I wasn't going to hang there for very long. My first thought was, I'm going to be captured. And my second thought was, if I'm going to be captured, I'm going to eat those 3 candy bars before I get captured. So I sat right there in the dark and ate 3 candy bars.
Suddenly I hit the ground, and I could hear gunfire off in the distance, and I thought, well, we're here.
Though everyone jumped, many did not land on their drop zone due to fog. Scattered over 25 miles, the 517th would have to somehow find one another amidst enemy fire on the ground to complete their first mission.
We missed our field by about 25 miles. So they had a sand table set up, you know, and they said, okay, now when you land, look up and see which way the planes are going. And then you go to the left of this field and follow a ravine up to a little knoll, and we're going to get together and reform up there.
I was lucky. I had a good landing. Only about 5 miles from where I was supposed to be.
I ended up dropping into a bush grape orchard in the middle of a German command post, along with 8 other soldiers. I wondered why and how I could survive all that fire and not get hit, but I finally realized that I was low enough and the grapes were taking the velocity out of all of that fire, and all they were doing is mowing grapes, and the grape leaves were falling down on me.
The drop zone was about 2 miles west of Lemuy, and we were about half a mile east of Lemuy. Even though we were 2 minutes late, we never got right on the DZ, but we weren't too far away.
But it took me probably that day, maybe into the next day, before we joined up with the rest of the troops in Lemuy. Yeah.
Some officers found a Frenchman who was going to tell them where we were. Well, nobody told me. I didn't find out until a long time afterwards.
I didn't have any idea where we were until I moved. We landed about 4:30 in the morning. It was dark. And I moved out to a blacktop road. And that's the first time I knew exactly where I was. I remember seeing this little French marker that said Lemouy, 6 kilometers. That morning, we started getting some sporadic fire from Germans who were confused as hell. I mean, they didn't know, whether there were 100,000 paratroopers or where they dropped. They were more confused than we were. But we did that morning. We got sporadic fire from various small groups of Germans as we would be marching down these various roads. And then D+1, we really got a lot of action. It was the season when the grapes were on the vineyard. I remember these soldiers rushing out there and getting a helmet full of grapes and rushing back at it, and the Germans would shoot like hell. But these troops still, and I'd tell them, God damn it, keep your head down. But about that time, some damn trooper would rush out there, get a handful of grapes, and come back. What a bunch of guys.
We were getting across a valley filled with grapevines. Then we encountered some machine gun and sniper fire. It was coming from a slight hill in front of us. As we got closer, the fire started falling off, and by the time we got up to the building, there was no fire. And we could hear movement inside the building. So I held up a grenade, and he shook his head, so I popped a grenade and threw it in the building, and it went off. So we sat there and listened for a few minutes. We're hearing more noise, and he's about to throw another grenade in, and all of a sudden a chicken walked out with about 5 or 6 little chickens. And their feathers were all ruffled up and backwards. And I don't think we killed a chicken. And so we jumped in the building, and we didn't kill any Germans because they were all gone. And it was a wine cellar. And the building was full of wine bottles, and we didn't kill any chickens, we didn't kill any Germans, and we didn't break a bottle of wine in there.
On the way to the command post, Roberts and his sergeant escaped the German command post and later ran into British paratroopers. Together, they devised a plan to capture the compound.
There were 9 men of 3 groups which ran to the wall as hard as they could go and threw the gammon grenades over, and then the man stood tall against the wall, the next man kneeled down, and the third man got down his knees, and then all the rest of us ran up over their backs and up over the wall and dropped into that compound. They were running their Tommy guns full tilt all the time, just absolutely, but they stayed in formation so that they wouldn't shoot each other. In about 10 minutes, there were 40 dead and 40 prisoners out of all of that black smoke. I began to think that maybe I would survive, but at that time, I really thought I was dead.
That afternoon in particular, we were getting mortared by the enemy and getting a lot of machine gun fire. Bill Boyle and some of his people were under heavy German fire, and they were more or less pinned down, and I was told, take my battalion and go down and capture the town and relieve Boyle and his people.
On day 2 of Operation Dragoon, the entire combat team fought together as a regiment for the first time. They successfully took Les Arcs and cleared a path for the Army to continue to move north.
The villagers are coming out, and of course it's Liberation. And so they're giving us, I didn't drink any wine at that point, but as we got into the village, The villagers are coming out with wine and some clear liquid which looked like and tasted like 7-Up. And after the first bottle, I'm having trouble focusing my eyes.
We made contact with the over-the-beach landing people on D+3. So our mission was over as far as preventing the Germans reinforcing.
Operation Dragoon was a remarkable performance, considered by military historians as the most successful of the war. The 517th's next mission was to protect the eastern flank of the 7th Army as it rushed up the Rhone Valley. The team's march was mostly on foot. With only the clothes they jumped with, they battled on for another 50 miles through the maritime Alps. Encountering a mix of skirmishes and liberation celebrations, in less than a week, they reached France's Var River.
The Germans were withdrawing, but they put up a pretty good fight. But we'd attack them, they'd withdraw, we'd seize the objective, and that continued until we got to the Var River. It looked like an impossible situation. Here you have the Germans holding this very high ground, 15 or 2,000 feet high, on the other side of the Var River. Good observation on us. The bridge is blown. What is usable of the bridge is under constant fire from the enemy, artillery fire and small arms fire. The staff and I came up with this idea: let's try and get one company, sneak one company across that river, lie in wait till late daylight, and attack La Roquette from the rear.
A large French man led us down a mountain side, literally a big cliff or mountain or whatever we want to call it, into the Var River. And we were to walk across that river at about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. It doesn't matter, it's very dark. At least one man washed down the river, but we rescued him.
They came up on the other side, moved up into a camouflage, a secure position, got their equipment in order, made a plan, went up at daybreak,
and started toward La Roquette. And on the way we saw 2 Germans on a motorcycle.
They hit a German motorcycle courier.
Unfortunately, I think now that we killed them and took from them several items of military intelligence, what they were planning to do to us. So it was an unfortunate action, but it proved profitable. Right. And we moved on into the town.
And from then on, they let the Germans have it. They completely surprised the Germans.
We started firing first right into these Germans who were lying there in the courtyard. We chased them out of there and captured somewhere between 100 and 150, I would say. And I know we killed at least 17.
It was the most daring operation, the 517th. Small scale, but when you capture 190 or whatever number of prisoners and kill a couple dozen, you know, that's a pretty good operation.
The daring mission allowed the rest of the regiment to cross the Var safely and continue up the maritime Alps.
By the time we'd been in those mountains, and we were there 93 days, I think it is, by the time the first 30 days were over, we'd worn our clothing out. We'd worn our boots out. We were constantly in need of water.
Troops moving like a bunch of goats, you know, up those side of those mountains. The Germans had blown all the damn roads.
Their final destination was the Col de Bras Sospel region, The mountain ranges surrounding the area control the roads leading to Italy. These roads were the main supply route for the Germans and vitally important to them.
Each day they would blow us off the top of the mountain and we would retreat back. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We're fighting for that thing. We lose it every day, but the Germans had to hold it because once we occupied that mountaintop and the others, all the way up to Paracava, which is quite a ways to the north, and the other forts, why we then held the high ground and the observation of those forts.
Basically, it was two mountain ridges, okay? They shot at us, we shot at them, mortars mainly.
One mortar came within maybe 4 or 5 feet from me, and it didn't go off. It just covered me with dirt. That's something to be thankful for. I thank that German worker for saving my life.
Germans defended the area by using forts built in World War I.
Anytime you'd reach a ridge or a trail or come down a road, those forts had they'd zeroed the weapons in on every crossroad, every culvert, everything that was there, and they'd done that probably in World War I.
It seemed like most of my time trying to get up to the top of Fort Barbanet and Fort Agnes. In the daytime, they could spot you. At night, they had booby traps set for you. You could only take 3 men with you, hoping not to get spotted. And I tried 8 times before I finally made it to the top. And there was only about 4 Germans up there, so they was no problem. Kill them. Shot them. Grenaded 2 of them.
And those forts would open up on us almost with a time sequence. If it was 7:27, you had better had your breakfast, your rations, and eaten them because that's when they're going to open up.
They would pick off anything that was around in there, and unfortunately when the motorcycle messenger boy didn't make it through there, and so I got his job. But I knew how they got him, and I decided that they weren't going to get me that way, and so I would stop at the edge of the woods and watch for their pattern of fire. When it eased a little bit, I'd crouch out on that motorcycle, turn it wide open, and scream across that straight road, get back into cover. My job then was to get up and down those switchbacks in the Maritime Alps down to Nice, where our high command was, and take messages and reports to them. As I was going up and down there, I came across a civilian, Frenchman, who was riding a bicycle, and he spoke a little English, and he indicated that he was trying to get food for his family. I decided then that my K rations in my pack I wasn't that hungry, and I gave them to him. So I did that a few times. And as a result of that, he invited me to his flat in Nice, and so I could sample some of what his wife would do with those K rations. And she'd make them pretty good. Then I learned about this little gal that they had with them. She was a little orphan girl. Her parents had been killed up in Normandy, and she was their niece. Her name was Louisette.
Battling in the area for several weeks, on the eve of October 27, 1944, American troops heard explosions in the town of Sospel. The next morning, the silence was suspicious.
Because it was awfully quiet, strangely quiet. And Juki took a patrol down into Sospel and found that they had completely pulled out.
So we got orders to lead E Company and parts of D Company down into the valley and up into Sospel. We were billeted in that command quarters, the German command quarters, that night with the company of E and some of D. And I remember going through with the lieutenant who was in charge of E Company, that we looked for that buildings, looked for a booby trap in the whole building, and we never found any. So we stayed with them, Merle and me, on the second floor of this German command building. It was a chalet, it was plush furniture and grand piano in it and all that. So we stayed with them that night, and then we left in the morning to meet the rest of our F company coming into Sospel from another area. Well, we got about a block away, and we heard this explosion behind us. And here that building, that chalet, went up in a cloud of smoke. And we couldn't figure out what happened, but I will never forget. We got there, and guys were screaming, and had fallen in with all that debris, and it was just chaos. And I think there were about 4 that were killed in that, and here again, we could have been killed right there. I'm telling you, it was devastating.
Sospel had been under a reign of German terror for months. It was the last French city to be liberated. Why the Germans gave up the area is unknown. It was not due to American pressure. The enemy withdrawal was possibly related to a coming offensive.
When they learned that we were going to leave that area and go up to Reims, northern France, for a rest camp, they wanted my wings, and they wanted to take them to the priest and have them blessed. I found this medal of St. Christopher, the patron saint, which is here, which is soldered to the back here. I don't know if you can see that or not. And on the back of it, I was surprised to see the name of Louisette inscribed on the back of this. And that kind of got to me, I have to admit. And I wore those wings for the rest of my tour of duty. There have been occasions where I wondered if it weren't these wings and that medal, that's the reason I'm still here.
And of course the mission was for us to stop them from reinforcing Italy, to stop them from reinforcing the beachhead, and that was our basic mission, and we accomplished it, but it took a long time. And almost everybody in the organization was a casualty of one form or another.
We marched back from Sospel about 40 miles, took some, what they called 40 and 8. It's an old World War I French boxcar. It took us up to Soissons, and we went up there. We arrived on the 6th of December. Made preparation for a Christmas party and refitting and all that.
We turned all our equipment in because we was coming back to the States. We had served our time. I had enough points. You went by points then. If you had enough points, you went home.
Like most of the American troops still in Europe, the men of the 517th thought they were going home. After many hard-fought battles, they had succeeded in every mission. Hitler was now on the run, and the Allied forces believed the war would be over by Christmas.
All of a sudden, the rumor was that the Germans had broken through in the Ardennes, and the 82nd had already gone, the 101st were already gone, and we were pulling out ourselves. But we were called up that quickly because this was a major, major breakthrough, and we didn't know how far they were going or what the true military situation was.
In fact, no one knew the true situation, not even most of the German forces. Hitler's last desperate stand was a secret. He knew he had lost the war, but hoped a win in Belgium would deliver a favorable peace treaty for Germany. To accomplish this mission, he unleashed his finest SS troops, outnumbering the U.S. 3-1. To attack, they would use the element of surprise in the middle of a cold and unforgiving winter.
We didn't know where the front was. The front was so liquid at that point. We had put people out in front of us supposed to tell us where we were supposed to engage in or what our job was, what our mission was. But it was a very liquid situation.
We had no idea where in the hell we were going. It was a rainy night, and everybody was on edge because the reports were that German parachutists had dropped and that they were changing the road signs and all of this.
And coming out of the Bulge were our tanks. Our tanks were no match for their tanks. So they were pulling out, and we're going in 2.5-ton trucks with just canvas covering, which didn't make us feel too well.
It was snowing, and we didn't have sleeping bags. We didn't have hot food. We weren't even sure we had our weapons, and some didn't.
No boots, just shoes, socks, and regular pants and a coat.
We took quite a beating during the Bulge, you know, besides wounds, frozen feet. Quite a contrast from the Riviera to 2 feet of snow, and we weren't really equipped for that type of weather. And they used us as firemen. I remember when we first went up there, we were attached to the 30th Division. And then later on, we were attached to the 106th Division, and then the 78th Division, 3rd Armored, 7th Armored. They just used us all over hell.
They would just plug us in wherever they needed an empty space to be filled. But we didn't have the cloak of a division to provide us with the support that we needed. And it's a wonder we weren't totally annihilated because of that.
And we reported to General Ridgway. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. And he told his chief of staff, any unit that came in and reported in, he wanted to brief them. The Boyle's outfit was the first to come in, the 1st Battalion, and they immediately got into a fight down around a little town called Oton.
The situation demanded immediate action. The 1st Battalion's mission was to clear the area of Soy and Houghton and establish a stable line of resistance between the two towns. Separated from their battalion, part of B and C Company were ordered by General Rose to join Task Force Kane at the hottest spot on the Western Front. The rest of the battalion was about to run into trouble.
We unloaded the trucks back in the hills and walked up to this road and down, and that was mined, and we happened to watch that. Made our way through the fields at night in the snow. It was up to your belly button. It was bad. No boots. I had newspaper wrapped around my feet. We got near the town of Houghton, which was about 20 miles away, I think. We got there early in the morning, and it was a real firefight.
We were attached to a tank unit, and were instructed to follow the old infantry school routine of having the tanks with the infantry dispersed among them. But the tanks were drawing fire, and the infantry was being shot up between Soy and Houghton, where I took off. One of our tanks was on fire, and there was somebody trapped inside. So I climbed into the tank and helped pull the fellow out and got him on the ground. And at that time, the Germans zeroed in on the tank and shot me.
And it was a real firefight. And the Germans knew he was there. And the 3rd Armored tanks helped us. They showed up from somewhere. If it hadn't been for them, we would have been annihilated.
We called for the medics for a stretcher, and they came down, and that's when the German tank shot at us and got me again. This time, a complete severance of the foot, of the leg. So I got out my jump knife, and I told my aide to cut it off. He got down on his knees, and the tears came down his face. He says, "I can't do it, Captain." I told him to cut it off.
It was 2 days before Christmas 1944 when Captain Ely was wounded for a second time. He was saved by medics and transported to a field hospital. For his brave service, Captain Earl Ely was awarded the Silver Star.
We got into town of Houghton. We went to a church. We all laid around the wall, and the shells was going off. Some was hitting church, some weren't. They was hitting a lot of houses close by. The Germans was shelling us bad. And the Germans was going down the road with the tanks. Oh, we just didn't know what the hell to do. And finally we got some tank support. And so we got rid of the Germans. And the Germans, when we got to the end of the row of houses, had their dead all rolled up in rows. It's the first I'd ever seen that.
The 1st Battalion had accomplished their mission. Colonel Boyle was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, and the 1st Battalion a Presidential Distinguished Unit Citation. It had been a rough 4 days.
On the wall, they had a big situation map. And I went over to the map and looking and finally found Manhay. And it looked like the whole damn German army was in and on Manhay. And I thought to myself, my God, am I glad I'm not involved in that one.
We left Malmedy Christmas Day, soon got orders. It was sent to headquarters. General Ridgway wanted Manhay taken that night at all cost.
Battalion only had 2 companies at the time. G Company was guarding Corps headquarters. So they had I Company and H Company were the only 2.
American troops had been driven out of there twice. Manhay was just a village. We got orders in the afternoon that we were going to attack Manhay that night.
They're in the forest, and they're in column, and I'm walking along the column and ran into Berger, and he said, look, Gibbons, he says, I don't have time to brief you on what's going on here. He said, but get on the end of the column, which was end of I Company, and keep them moving. What's going to happen, he said, we're going to have artillery, and then that's going to lift, and then we're going to go across the field, and they'll put artillery on the town, and then we'll go into the town.
At dusk of an evening, we get into a line of departure in a field someplace.
I get on the end of the column. H Company's behind I Company. Again, in column. The reason you're in column, it's night. You're in the woods, and you don't want to get lost, so you follow close the guy behind you.
2 o'clock in the morning, there was going to be a heavy artillery barrage on Manhay. It was one of the heaviest artillery barrages of the war.
They had tried to take it in the afternoon, I understand, with 2 battalions and didn't make it. Here we got 2 shot-up companies are going to try to take this town.
2 o'clock in the morning, this barrage started up. It lasted for 5 or 10 minutes. It was a terrific barrage. It shook the ground, and we could see where they were going, like on fire or something.
I thought it was German artillery, and really right on top of it, like to bounce.
And it stopped. And we advanced, I don't know, a short distance, probably so many yards. And one artillery battery didn't raise the guns. And their artillery fell on top of us. I Company was the lead company, and I was in H Company behind them.
Landed on the head of I Company. And as we were going along column, I get up to there, and here there's guys helping the wounded.
Them screaming and cursing, but we had orders not to stop.
I'm yelling, come on, get going, leave them alone. The aides will take care of them. Let's get going, because we've got to get in that damn town before those Germans get their heads up. Because if they get their heads up, we're never going to take the town, if we're going to take it anyway.
We captured it without very little problem. The Germans had been wiped out by the artillery barrage, and the only ones there were hiding in cellars.
And we go in and we take the town. And I'm the most surprised guy in the world.
The 3rd Battalion took Manhay on December 27, 1944. It was the first territory retaken from the Nazis and began to turn the Bulge inside out.
3 o'clock in the afternoon, I got a message from Regiment that I would move over, relieve the 2nd Battalion of 505, attack and seize Trop points, continue the attack to seize Montefosse. I want to see, you know, how close can I get to the objective I'm going to take tomorrow? What's the terrain like? What's the enemy's strength? you know, want to find out everything so he can make a plan. I get there and it's dark. In Belgium in January, the beginning of evening nautical twilight is about 4:30 or 4:45. So I get there and I talked to Ben Vandervoort, who was a battalion commander. I remember his famous words. He says, "Dick, there's nobody out there. Bunch of old men." You know, I've thought about that for 65 years. So I made a damn plan to attack by from the map. That's bad.
So we took off approximately 8 o'clock in the morning, and we were to take Trois Ponts.
No trouble taking Trois Points. Went like clockwork. But the Germans really didn't want to fight a whole hell of a lot. It's when I turned 10 degrees to take Montefosse.
And that was the worst orders we had received, to go straight up a mountain.
Montefosse is on a hill about 1,500 yards away. It looks like just a sea out there. There's no vegetation, nothing. I know there's just a bunch of old men up there. So we attacked.
We had to cross open field, and it looked like a cemetery because there were graves that were dug, and unbeknownst to us, they were zeroed in with enemy mortar.
Suddenly, all hell breaks loose. It turns out there's a reinforced battalion up there. Of course, they've been there for a couple days. They've got every depression zeroed in with mortars. They have interlocking fires with their machine guns.
Being a scout, I was out there with the head of the group of my company, and they started shelling us pretty bad. And I got behind a berm, and it wasn't long before to this day, I don't know if it was a German 88 or a big mortar that fell right near me, and it killed company commander John Castleman, and it wounded 2 other guys, and I never got a scratch. It was a concussion, and this was January 3rd, as I said, and it was about the first week in February that I woke up from a coma.
I've never seen such withering fire. Every time a man moved, he was shot. We lost 19 men killed, and I think it was close to 100 wounded.
My best buddy at that time was killed, and the sad part about it is he begged not to die. He says, "I don't want to die," but it was too late. That was the closest friend or buddy that I had that was killed in that battle.
I told Regiment I needed some help, that I was not going to move anybody. I said, every time somebody moves, they get shot. I need some tanks, and I need some artillery fire. Well, about 4 o'clock, a platoon of TDs came out of the woods. 6 of them. First 3 were knocked out by direct fire by the Germans. The other 3 withdrew. I told my people, stay absolutely flat. Come dark, we'll get out of this goddamn place.
There were several battles that I didn't think we would make it through, but I personally was fired at so many times, and so many bullets landed around me, that I felt that some way I would make it, and I did.
Most of the troopers made it after Colonel Boyle and his 1st Battalion brought reinforcement relief.
The 1st Battalion would move up around my right after dark, and that's what Bill Boyle did. Bill got wounded there behind Monty Foss. But that's the worst day of my life, and I think about it all the time.
The remnants of the 517th 2nd Battalion made it out and rested for a few days. They were then attached to the 7th Army Division and assigned to recapture St. Vith. But first, they must take the village of Huntage.
Just before the tanks were to move, we'd fire a TOT on Huntage. We got 17 battalions of artillery. Now 17 battalion, that's 17 times 12. Every one of those guns firing a round on Huntage at that exact time. Just getting dark and having these tanks, I mean, you got 12 tanks on line. Those cannons made that blast at night. Firing these damn machine guns. My mortars firing like hell on them. I tell you, it was like the 4th of July.
I almost got to the point sometimes that I felt sorry for the Germans.
The tanks are moving. They moved through the damn infantry, arrived on Huntage. Hell, the Germans are shell-shocked. I had the reserve company continue to move through Huntage down about halfway up to St. Vith in a pretty good defensive position along the main road leading into St. Vith with a platoon of tanks in case we got a counterattack.
We had our tanks fighting the German tanks, and so that was helping us know where they were.
But we found out the next day when the Germans pulled out of Huntage, they all pulled out like a bunch of rats out of St. Vith.
I was twice wounded. Frozen feet, frozen hand. Well, I just wished that I had been, I don't know, quicker, I guess. I had to leave a lot of good men.
St. Vith ended the Battle of the Bulge. The 517th Regiment was recommended for the Presidential Citation for great heroic action. After the Belgian Bulge was pushed back to the German line, the Allied forces pressed on into Germany to force a surrender. Their first mission was to take the town of Schmidt to prevent the Germans from releasing the dam surrounding the area and literally drowning attacking forces. They had just 4 days to do it. Along the way, the 517th was unexpectedly diverted to the village of Bergstein. The most direct path was through the Hurtgen Forest, where the enemy had prepared the strongest defenses of the Western Front.
When you're in the Hurtgen Forest, it's like being at nightfall. It's just difficult to move.
It was pouring rain, snow, sleet, and the division that had been fighting, try to break through, called for us to come up, and they couldn't break through.
We moved in through the Black Forest, that we called it, into Bergstein. It was literally destroyed, the most destroyed village we had ever seen in Germany. And it was raining and very muddy, and we walked over bodies going into the town that night.
Damn Germans have been there for weeks. There are all kinds of tank hulls around the place where the Germans had fought on the edge of Hurtgen Forest. Graves called the battalion commander and said, we're going to make a night attack. We're not going to fire any preparatory artillery. We're going to sneak up there.
It was 1.5 miles to the objective, where they were to isolate the German forces by seizing the Schmidt-Nittigen Road.
We went through the biggest minefield in the history of any war at that time, and we snaked our way through in the middle of the night. Our engineers had probed us a way through it and had laid their ribbons, and we crawl on our bellies in the mud. And we used to go out, and each company was two companies meet 3 miles behind the lines. And then we were to attack the next morning from there as this other outfit attacked.
F Company was given a 1-inch piece of fluorescent tape, which we put in the back of our helmets. And of course the orders were, the fellow in front of you fell or anything happened to him, they fell down a hole, the fellow who was behind him was supposed to catch up with the column in front of him. But I think somebody fell in a hole and the fellow behind didn't do what he was supposed to do and tried to help the fellow out of the hole, and the column lost contact with one another.
We was going through, and every now and then, Juki, our captain, he led the way, and he was a great big tall guy and hard to keep up, and we kind of got lost every now and then. So we'd have to stop and let guys keep up because you're running in the mud and snow and everything else. He come back to me and he said, "Traver, where's everybody behind you?" I said, "I don't know." I looked back and they're gone.
Those two platoons kept moving, bless their damn hearts. They were eventually captured. But the Germans had moved right through that F Company.
Captain Juki said, "Let's go, we got to get over there and get to where we're supposed to meet E Company." It was a bridge. And we took off, and he was a great big guy jumping logs and everything else, and me and this other kid was little, but we kept up as best we could. And we run on to this German, just a kid. And he begged not to keep killing kid, but he looked like he's about 13, 14, somewhere around there. And so we took him with us, and we got up to where E Company was supposed to be. No one was there.
While Juki, Traver, and Flynn were trapped behind enemy lines, the 2nd and 3rd battalions faced their own challenges.
It is the black, black night, and all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. You'll hit the ground. Remember that particular sound of a bullet going right past you? Thinking about Churchill said nothing is exhilarating as being shot at and missed. But yeah, I was just trying to hug the ground.
Of course, it didn't have any artillery fire on these guys. And it's dark as hell, and they've lit the place up. That's where you could see them. I mean, they made the place look like daylight. And again, it's the position. Every time a man moved, he'd get shot, so the troops are hugging the old terrain.
In the 517th, in our history of battle, we always made our mission. We were always successful. Some were very difficult, some were easier, but we were used to covering ground, being successful. And we got there and things weren't going right. We weren't taking anything.
The men of the 517th were up against their own mirror image, the German paratroopers. Even at this late stage in the war, they were young, strong, and ready to die for their furor.
I'm getting fire from my left. The 3rd Battalion's on my left. They got a pretty strong counterattack. And they withdrew. I didn't realize they were withdrawing. And the counterattack came between me and the 2nd and 1st Platoon of F Company. I halted our attack and then got word from regiment, withdraw with the 3rd Battalion, which we did. But I lost those 2 platoons of F Company.
The battalions withdrew and returned to Bergstein to re-strategize. The overriding problem was the massive minefields beneath the snow. The 596 engineers would work tirelessly for the next 36 hours to clear a path to resume attack. While the majority of the troops hunkered down in Bergstein, others lay in wait for relief.
Captain Juki at that time woke me up and he said, "Traver, the little bastard's gone." We was there and we was leaning back in the tree shrubs all around us except the shell hole. And these 2 officers come and stood right up like this, about that far from their boots, about that far from our heads, and smoking and talking in German. And old Juki reached up and touched one of them's boot just to see if for the fun of it. He was that kind of a guy.
We go out, my platoon, and it's daylight, and I got a couple of scouts out, and the scouts are fired on. The scout comes back to me, and says, "Lieutenant, we've got an open field in front of us." I'm trying to decide which way we're going to go, and we're on our haunches, like so, and I'm talking to the scout, and I look up, and here is a German helmet right behind the scout. And he sees me, realizes, see, we're behind their lines. We'd come through the minefield. He expects Germans to be there. He doesn't expect American soldiers to be there. So he's completely shocked when he gets up to us. And I look up, and I think he must have realized we were Americans at the moment I saw him.
And we could still hear the Americans cussing and fighting out there trying to get to us. And about that time, here come 8 Krauts, and they poked their heads up over the side of this big shell hole. They were Krauts. And so we were sitting there, Juki with his submachine gun, me with my BAR, and Flynn with his 03. And I said, "Okay, Juki, what do you want to do?" And he said, "Pardon me, F it." And they took us out. That's when they got us out of that hole. They stripped us down, and then they were going to kill Juki because he was just too frightening for them. And I talked them into not shooting. I told him, I told this kid, he brought him up. I said, "We didn't shoot you, don't shoot him." And they got the message, and they didn't.
Men were taken as POWs by the German forces. They were held for almost 4 months. Juki reportedly tried to escape twice and made it home alive after the war. Flynn died while in a French hospital after his release. Traver sailed home a year after his capture on the anniversary of D-Day.
The last night was the last day of our combat. The last night, 2nd Battalion made a patrol down through the side of a ravine to try and get down to the Roar River. And the beginning of the column, as I understand it, reached the road that was down at the bottom. We were up at the more or less the last ones. We made that last trip down through that gulch, was about the size of a company. I think we had 13 men in F Company left.
That stands out in my mind as one of the roughest engagements that we had, because usually we're more successful. Then we learned later that maybe we were ordered to do this as a diversionary attack because they had something else in mind, and I'm wondering if wasn't the case.
We pulled back, and we found out that we were making a secondary effort, or whatever you'd call it, a diversionary. We could have done it with less people getting hurt.
In fact, the real mission had been to make the Germans believe the primary attack was near Bergstein, so the main forces could capture the town of Schmidt. The 517th accomplished this diversion all too well, but proved a callous exploitation of the troopers' drive and courage. In 3 days, the regiment lost over 500 men and a quarter of its rifle strength. Any credit for this victory belongs to the 517th as well as others. This would be the last battle they would fight as a combat team. By early April, the European war is coming to a close. Members of the 517th are scattered, some still healing from wounds, some discharged, and some assigned to other divisions.
I got a letter from South France telling me that Louisette was up in the sanitarium, TB sanitarium. When we were told that we could go any place, Norway, Sweden, England, wherever we wanted to go, as a reward for getting through it and staying alive. And I learned that Louisette was up in that sanitarium. That the only thing I could do, I went up to that sanitarium to see her. And she laughed and she cried, everything. It was a very emotional time. And I went up there and I stayed a day, or most of a day. And then I left her. And of course, that was the last time I left and saw her. And then I got word that she did not survive.
I'll never forget that trip back. And a lot of the ships in the harbor were blowing their horns and sending up streams of water as a welcoming. I'll never forget it.
They had traveled over 6,000 miles, fought in 4 countries, and paid for 5 campaigns with 1,500 casualties. The young enthusiasts who sailed from America 3 years earlier were no longer kids, now war-hardened men who each fought bravely for the battle of their lives and for our freedom.
Although I commanded the 82nd and been in every damn airborne unit, the 517th where my heart is.
We were as close as brothers. Without a question, we were as close as brothers. And many of us didn't. I have a sister, but I never had a brother. But all those guys were brothers. And to this day, we're still just as close as that.
The regiment was officially deactivated on February 25th, 1946. But the team would live on in the textbooks of history and the spirit of the men of the 517th.